So recently, I've had some people who are on my network who have asked me to do a video on how am I so prolific and how might they take some of my traits, habits, skills, um, both the good and the bad perhaps, that will make them a more prolific writer, researcher, thinker, and just perhaps human being. I would have to say that foundational to being a writer for me, a good writer, is to be a good researcher. To be a good researcher is to be a good host. All right, well, there's a metaphor. To be a good host. I was thinking about that this morning, that my productivity over 45 plus 50 years of both being a visual artist, being a writer, researcher, educator, etc., as well as an academic scholar, all the things that I do is based on thinking this morning. It's really fundamentally that I've taken an attitude, adopted an attitude, which you have to practice. So you adopt it first, the attitude, then you develop very specific, singular, small steps to practice that attitude daily, more or less you have to be effective. The idea of hospitality is that I will embrace, right? I will embrace the guest. When you're hosting at your home and somebody says they're in the area, and you might say to them, oh, would you like to stay at our place for a while, or even come for dinner? And the moment that you reach out with that natural heart of hospitality, of invitation to someone, something, and I'm going to suggest the writer is a host of ideas. And ideas come from both research, finding other people's ideas, observations of the world, as well as your own creative imagination. Keep in mind all of those different kinds of data inputs that you have to pay attention to, collect, and then give sanctity to. Give them, let's just say, ideas, which is what I'm going to talk about today. Give those ideas merit. Give a word, a concept, merit as belonging, and that you will host them as a guest in your home, in your head, in your heart, in your soul. So you become a collector. So you're not going to come into my house, where I live, and you can look around my writing studio right now, without seeing things like this. What the heck is that? Well, it's got to do with me making cards about all kinds of thinking one day. I did this about a couple years ago, and I just wanted to say, how many different kinds of ways of thinking are there that I could talk about, that I could label, give a category to, put into, in this case, I put them in alphabetical order, and I thought, well, eventually, maybe if I came up with 500 and some, 12, I think, here, and different ways of thinking that you could label. And then I thought, well, okay, then I could put notes on here, or I could attach notes from other people's work or things I see or just thoughts I have in the world, and go, okay, that kind of fits that category of thinking, whatever it might be. So you just won't come around my space as a writer and not see tons and tons of boxes and piles of cards. I like the cards because you can file them and put them in, and they're physical filed, which is very different than filing on a computer. I am not a big filer on computers. You have to do some of that, but I learned this technique just naturally, where I like the physical manipulation, and I can lay cards out and I can have this physical relationship embodied by touch, and it shows that more care, right? It's like hosting them and you touching them and offering the gift of attention to those cards, those ideas, the accumulating of the knowledge, the database in them. Then from those cards, in real life, I wrote an article which was on, can't remember this title for it, for a journal, and it was an educational journal of, you know, how to teach different ways of thinking. And just imagine if a child, you know, had a deck of cards of all the different ways of thinking and labels on them. Not only that they could make up themselves and what's their deck of cards for thinking, that they could accept from other people, elders, people like myself as a scholar, and say, well, I could just give them my deck and like reproduce the deck and pass it out to schoolrooms where kids can investigate, learners can investigate. Wow, I never thought that was a type of thinking, or could be a type of thinking. And it's sort of endless. So you can see I'm very interested in that originality of coming up with new concepts, ideas, and I've never seen anybody do this with thinking as I was doing. And perhaps it's a bizarre idea, perhaps it won't go anywhere, but perhaps that journal article someday some teacher will pick it up and go, oh wow, let's make decks of cards about types of thinking and get everybody involved so that we expand, right, the way people think about what thinking is and how to utilize it as an actual practice for producing cultural products, for producing useful applications. So all of that about, as again, about organizing, right? Observing, organizing, all of that process of being a good host. You have to organize. When you've got a guest coming, you got to make sure there's extra sheets, there's extra towels, there's extra food in the house. What are we going to do for dinner for the next few days? And then what activities am I going to do? How am I going to plan that? So I'm not an anal kind of person in the way of hosting. I'm actually quite organic when I have somebody that I'm hosting in our home, for example. My partner is a little bit more organized, and that's complementary to me. But when it comes in the writing and research field, I'm incredibly, quote, sometimes very anal to do these kinds of card things. But I don't have an anal personality like that. I actually do it because, not that I'm afraid of losing things, which I don't like losing things. I like to keep things in order. I don't like to go looking for an idea that I know I wrote that down somewhere, but I don't know where it is. That's very annoying. It's just not, I don't have a big fear around that or anxiety around it. It's just annoying because it's a loss of time. It's a loss of the attention I gave to that idea, put it down somewhere, and then never thought carefully about how to categorize it and file it. So the other aspect of being a good host to make you a good researcher, a good writer, a prolific person through this organizing is to give attention to how you place things and how you want to use memory of those things in a continuity of memory that accumulates, and then you can capture, pull out those cards, pull out those notes, and boom, you all of a sudden might get these connections that are really interesting, original, because you've arranged all kinds of data in particular categories. So this is what taxonomists do. This is what a person who's a museum curator has to do, right, to keep all their specimens in order, and classifications, in protection, so they don't, you know, break down and dissipate over the years. When you make a collection of ideas like I do here, like I think of them that they could be passed on to other generations. I am creating a library. So that's really important here, to be prolific writers, to have this attitude of you're always creating a library of ideas. And the richer that library, the more organized it is for being able to find things, not getting lost. But of course, things will always get lost because it's so complex, and the more you do, the more years you do it, the more chances things will get lost. It's that care of being a good librarian for yourself, for your life. And that's what breeds, in my experience, breeds a good, effective use of data, observation, as I say, etc., into good writing, and really interesting writing, because you've put all these different ideas together that you've saved for perhaps even decades, and then someday you just go into that pile of cards and notes and files, and you just go, I'm ready to put those together. My mind's working differently. I think differently now, so I can look at that same data and produce something that I wouldn't have produced 5, 10 years ago when I was looking at it, or even when I was creating that set of files. Okay, you've got some good connections there from hosting, right? Hospitality as a general attitude, and then how to practice that hospitality daily in small steps. So I just started a book, and it was tough for me to make the transition to do this book because I have 90 days to produce this new book and to have a publisher and everything. So that's all exciting, but then I have to think about how to transition my life and all the things I was doing before I got the contract, on the book, right? I have to make now this transition into organizing. Now it's kind of painful because I have to make changes, and I had a routine going of what I was doing before I knew I had this contract, and so now I got it. I have to concentrate, I have to focus, and that's good, but it takes 3 to 4 days at least, I've noticed here, to make that shift and to feel comfortable, not have the anxiety up so high, I'll never be able to do this, it's too wieldy, it's too new, I have a short timeline. So all those doubts of one's capability. Well, how do you get around the doubts of capability, I find, and I'm not going into deep psychology here in this video, I'm going to be very structural functionalist and pragmatic of how to organize, how to set up the hosting attitude again for these ideas in this book. I have to go in, and one of the just small things I'll do is, okay, go in and make a digital file, a Word document on your computer, label it, for parts of this book, and then you put it on your desktop in a folder, right? And then you can put folders within folders and files within folders. But just to do that one day, like I just feel like I can't do more today. I feel already I'm still trying to, unhook from all those other things that I still wanted to do and was doing, or even a tiredness and exhaustion that I may have prior to getting this contract. I have to deal with that inertia that wants to pull away back into those easy, that was comfortable. Yeah, my whole system, most biological systems have a tendency to go to habit and just a little more simple, a little easier. And so you do have to crank yourself up by making these steps of host preparing for, as a host preparing for the new guest. And the new guest is your book and all those ideas within that book and all the treasured original ways of putting those ideas together in a final production to prepare for the publishing. So give yourself time and space to make the transitions into, a project that you might want to take on, and realize it won't be easy. There'll be pulls back, and there's no point really in, you can feel what it feels like. That's good, but there's no point in getting down. Oh, I wish I could do. I wish I wasn't like this. I wish I wasn't procrastinator. I mean, those are kind of like wishes of very ephemeral traits. Not saying they're not real, but really the simplest is you got to do something every day toward making the transition. And so I'll do this today, right? I'll set up that file today. I'll clean up my office and create some space on the table for this new project, which I had to do. And I've taken about 3 days just to slowly clean up my space to create other stuff out of the way so I can put new stuff on this project, right? And host it and give it that respect of, you deserve space. This new book project deserves space, like a new coming baby. You create the nursery, right? You do some work, you prep it, you paint it, you clean it, you reorganize, you get it ready. So that may take a while. That may be weeks even getting ready. And sometimes I've always said, once you spend habits of getting ready, it's amazing how then things will start to fall in place, and then you'll, now I'm ready to write, or now I'm building a file and I know how to do it and how I want to categorize it on this new data, on this new subject or topic, whatever it is. So today I'm not talking about any particular topic. I'm not talking about fiction, nonfiction writing, poetry, or anything. I'm talking about being a good host, creating hospitality for your new birthing, this kind of new child that's coming about, and who knows how long that may go. If you're not on a contract and you're trying to do this, it's very different, because you then have to discipline your own self on how to create that rhythm and to prepare, right, for when that birthing is ready to really go into full mode of production. Okay, so another thing I learned about these cards and organizing structures is that when you make cards, you also have to organize them. And so my topic has been fear for 30 years. So when I really started, I was just a maniac, literally and I really enjoyed the process. I have that kind of mind that loves organizing different things, diversity, and putting it into categories. As you can see on these orange cards, certain categories of subjects. And within that subject, there's many of these cards, which I just made out of paper. And, the authors and the date is there of that place that I found it. And it'd be some kind of quote about fear, that I write in hand notes. Some people do this on computer and then run them off and cut them up. I've done that too. But in the good old days, I used to just keep doing these by hand. And they're in all in alphabetical order. So when I find something on, the effects of fear or whatever the topic is, I've got the reference, right? And then at the back of the box, this whole section here is all the references, that are, as a scientist or as a research writer, you have to write the full reference so you don't lose it. Where'd you get the source? Right? So your source. I have a lot of these boxes, particularly on the fear topic, but even on other topics, conflict, I've done, and so on. Those are just such rich resources when you want to write on a topic, and you've got this diversity of all these different authors and different domains and different subject matter. So then when I'm not doing that on cards, I have another process here that I use, which is, if you don't want to use cards, you can just use files. So I have tons of these file boxes, which are fear files, and this one I put a red dot on the article. So let's pull that out. So yeah, just a folder, right? These are all, again, all in alphabetical order, and these are all my hand notes, and there'll be an author on here. I found a quote and some of the things that are related to fear by that author, and then as I was doing those authors, I said, well, they're all sort of about cultural studies, right? So that's why I have cultural here. And these are the authors, R to Z, and their last name, alphabetical order. And then I put a red dot, even on the piece of paper. So here's something I ran off. And on this person, seeing the red dot immediate, in case they get scattered, right? While you're working, you don't want to lose your filing system, because you might be using these from other folders. I think I have 13 subject folders. I have cultural, I have anthropological, I have feminist, biological, and so on folders on all fear quotes from people's writing. And that color dot system really worked good, still does. Okay, so then you can go beyond cards, right? It's just a little easier. Sometimes you just want to photocopy something and stick it in a file, right? So that's the problem with the cards. You always have to translate and write by hand in cards. But I would also not say that you shouldn't do that, because there's something about, I do it a lot. It's totally consistent with my research of way I copy stuff. And by copying by hand somebody's text, I learn something. It goes in a part of my brain, in the subconscious even, because I won't necessarily have a recall for all that information, but I am pretty positive, confident that that subconscious copying and writing out of other people's work, it's amazing. I think it will come to you in moments of writing, that the subconscious will yield, the unconscious will yield at certain times. Not always predictable, not always controllable. So there's where you have to kind of trust that, yes, all that work I'm doing of copying out these notes, right, hosting those ideas and giving them a place, right, and a category and a label, and just a place in the library, your own personal library. You have to be a librarian, I believe, to be a prolific writer and an original writer, because you will have such a massive database to draw on, and not just all your little biases of what's comfortable to pay attention to or not. The library keeps reminding, oh, you forgot this piece. And I go, yeah, thanks. So I love doing that. I love going into these old files sometimes. And I go, oh, I forgot I ever collected that. I forgot that completely, so-called. But, this is your unconscious in all these files and data. So when I started doing those cards, I started doing it when I was bird watching, just to let you know. I did it naturally. I wanted to keep track of all my bird observations of different species in the day, and I found that really fascinating when I was a young person in my teens and early 20s, and had these card files on different bird species, when I see them, how many there was, what they were doing. I'd make little notes. And I did write some articles using those, but you're collecting way more data than you're ever going to be able to summarize and create a document, an article or a book about. But that's just part of the process. It's excess. You have to practice and be willing to do excess and enjoy excess, creating excess, rather than looking and going, oh, I've got all that stuff, I'll never be able to deal with it, I'll never be able to summarize it. Yeah, you got to drop that really quickly, and as soon as you can do that as a writer and as a prolific creator of cultural production, just forget it, because there's excess. It's tons of excess, and I just keep creating excess. Why? Because it's just interesting to create even the excess, because someday, and if it isn't you that puts it all together, you've created a library where somebody else, maybe it's the next generation, maybe it's a nephew of yours, maybe it's a grandson or a granddaughter, and whatever, that will say, wow, thanks for creating that library. Like, now they can take off at a level much without having to do all that hard work, right? So it's creating a heritage of your hosting of ideas. That makes to me, a great researcher, educator, author in our society. And I just wanted to say that there's this book, Leela. I've obviously used the cover for something else at one point. A book by Robert Pirsig. He was a very interesting philosophical writer and wrote 2 novels. And they were both pretty much bestsellers, especially his very first one, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, back in the 70s. And then he wrote this one in the 90s. 2 books he only wrote in his life, but they were just really popular and really still, like I say, the one is still a classic. And this one is too, in a different way. So they're novel form, but in here he actually talks about his writing process. Excuse me. As a writer in the actual novel, the protagonist. And there's one point in there where he's actually talking about how he organizes his ideas for his books, his novels. And I'm sure this is Robert Pirsig's very method of why his novels are just so interesting and original and deep thinking, and have so many ideas, so rich. And he talks about, writing on little sheets of paper and putting them in boxes, organizing them, such. So when I read that some years after doing it myself, I think it just inspired me to keep doing it. I said, oh, good, somebody else is as nuts as I am to do this card categorizing of things. And then you can play with the categories and move them around. And then he wrote his novels, he wrote his books, his articles, ideally. The protagonist did. And Pirsig obviously produced a couple novels. And I presume he used that technique. So I'd let you into quite a few things there. The other thing I don't want to miss, because it's an everyday thing for me, it's one of those habitual practices, and that's journaling, right? So I'll fill 200 pages of a journal easily, and make sure I date them, put your name on them just in case you lose them, address and stuff like that. And I carry these around with me, or they're at home, but I'm constantly, pretty much daily, doing some kind of amount of journaling, and that can be from a couple of sentences to, when I get on a roll, I'll do 12, 13, 14, 15 pages of pages filled of ideas popping in. And so the journaling may start with something simple. I had toast this morning with bananas and peanut butter, and then I'll just let it flow. So that's how I just keep ideas flowing. And then sometimes memory will come in, or something I want to record from that happened yesterday, or a dream. And you don't have to go into fine detail. If you want, you can, but it actually just keeps me writing every day. And a lot of authors speak about the everyday writing habit and the willingness to host it within a journal like that. And journals are nice and easy to keep. And then you can throw notes in, you can glue stuff in, you can type stuff. Maybe it's an email that you really like and you put it in there, and then I number all the pages, at the top. And because the date's on here, they're numbered. And on the front of the journal, right, I've got from such and such a date to the next journal. These become little research tools. So I can go in and not only do research on them, and you can see sometimes I underline stuff, that comes from somebody or an idea. Yeah, and I'll use different kind of little drawings, diagrams, somebody. So they're thinking tools, right? I think within these, and writing, thinking is one and the same for me. Thinking, writing, thinking. It's not one or the other. They actually are part of each other. And so the more thinking you do will move your writing more. The more writing you do will move your thinking more. But put them together. And I know a lot of people who just think and they don't write, and that thinking, can disappear. And so you can see I'm making a library of my thinking. I'm making a library and hosting ideas. Everything is part of the collection, just like a stamp collection, just like a plant collection of species, that very specific, organized way. I know not all writers use these kinds of approaches. I'm just sharing today what I do. And then to the sort of final stage of a book, all my books end up in a binder of some kind, labeled well so you can find it again, because I have a lot of books I never finish. I have tons, way more I don't finish, the excess number, sitting on shelves, but at least I can remember and look at those binders and go, oh yeah, that idea, maybe it's ready, maybe it's not, maybe it never will be, to go back in and try to bring it to a final book form. But the point of, you can see the tabs in here, creating tabs for putting in a chapter or just a particular, I think this was lessons I was doing on a particular topic, and I just label them. And then in a ring binder, right, you can go in and pull sheets out, you can add new sheets, and then you can just stick notes and stuff in, right? Like say I just stick stuff, I use a paper clip, and this is somehow related, I find later this is related to this book, and I might use it for that book. It's another folder, right? It's another container. So to be a good host, you have to create containers. You have to create containers of organization, of order. And in that order, you can have tons of chaos. Don't worry about that. That's not my point. You can just throw stuff in for a while sometimes. You may not be ready to dig in and make that all go to a final product each time, especially when you don't have to, right? You don't have a contract or something. But I think you get the idea. Enough order to hold the chaos, so multiple inputs of data, observations, ideas that are flowing in the world, flowing through you. They're not all yours. Don't worry about if they're all yours. And you're going to be the one that organizes them and puts them together. Maybe someday, maybe goes in there and pulls them out and then really develops them very fine-tuned to a production that you feel it's original, it's creative, it's rich, because it's got rich research being held. And my basic experience is that I have less anxiety about the writing process of production of any kind, really, as I have organizing containers for the anxiety itself. So in some sense, you're putting the anxiety you have of production, which is almost going to be inevitably there to be a creative process, the tensions of that, the unknowns of that, all the encounters of your own motivations, processes, good and not so good. You're really organizing all those emotions, that anxiety around that into structures that you can tangibly hold, organize, categorize, play with, and go, oh, this is interesting. I want to change those categories. I want to redo that, the way I organize those cards or those sheets or those folders. And it's in just that playing, that physical process. I've said this before, the physicality of it, rather than trying to do it all on digital. I know people say, well, it saves paper on digital. I'm going, yeah, but if your work is really important and you feel it's important to the world, educatively, creatively, go ahead, use paper. Go ahead, even waste paper, because you're doing something really useful with that paper. So I would never feel guilty about or ashamed about that use of resources. So I wouldn't get caught into, doing everything digital. I think you lose a lot of somatic, connective, and I think we evolved. I know we evolved through tangibility, through doing things with our hands and our bodies, to build our intelligence. So computers are useful, but they are very unuseful, in my opinion, in staying really in this physical connection to your data, your observations, and the organizing of your anxiety. Thanks very much. I won't know if I'll do another one of these. You can give me feedback on if it was useful to you or not. And remember, this is kind of my style, and may you be prolific in your